What if one of the biggest mistakes people make in the kitchen isn't adding too much salt, but heating certain foods far beyond what they were ever meant to handle? You've probably heard people say that burnt food causes cancer. But how much of that is actually true? Can overheated foods really increase your risk of pancreatic cancer? Or is this another internet myth? Today, I'm going to separate fear from facts. I'm going to walk you through what science actually knows, what science doesn't know yet, which foods deserve a little more attention in your kitchen, what cooking habits doctors generally recommend, and some simple changes that may help lower your overall health risks. Stay with me until the end, because the final recommendation surprises most of my patients. I'm Dr. Alan Mercer, and for more than 35 years, I've had the privilege of caring for older adults just like you. Over those decades, I've heard just about every kitchen myth you can imagine. Some of them turn out to have a kernel of truth. Others are pure folklore. And pancreatic cancer, because it's a disease that frightens so many of us, tends to attract more myths than most. So let's slow down, take a breath, and look at this together, calmly and honestly. Let's start with something simple. What actually happens when food is overheated? When you cook meat, bread, or starchy vegetables at very high temperatures, especially through grilling, frying, roasting, or broiling, a series of chemical reactions take place. One of the most familiar is called the Maillard reaction. This is actually the same reaction responsible for that delicious golden brown crust on a steak or a loaf of bread. It's not inherently dangerous. In fact, it's one of the reasons cooked food tastes so good to us. But when temperatures climb even higher and food starts to char, blacken, or smoke, additional compounds can form. Researchers have spent decades studying two families of these compounds in particular: heterocyclic amines, which scientists often shorten to HCAs, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, shortened to PAHs. I promise you, we are going to explain both of these in plain English in just a moment. But first, I want you to understand something important. There's a real difference between normal cooking and burning food. Browning your toast is not the same as blackening it into a piece of charcoal. Searing a steak to get a nice crust is not the same as leaving it on a grill until it's covered in char. This distinction matters a great deal, and it's something that often gets lost when headlines try to grab your attention. Have you ever wondered why grilled food in particular gets so much attention in these conversations? It's because grilling, especially over an open flame, tends to produce higher amounts of these compounds compared to gentler cooking methods like baking, steaming, or slow roasting. That's simply due to the higher temperatures and the direct contact with flame or very hot metal. Now let's talk about HCAs, heterocyclic amines, in plain language. When muscle meats, that means beef, poultry, pork, and fish, are cooked at high temperatures, particularly through pan frying, grilling, or broiling, natural compounds in the meat can react with each other and form HCAs. These compounds form primarily on the surface of the meat, especially where it becomes well done, charred, or blackened. In laboratory studies, HCAs have shown the ability to cause changes in DNA, which is the genetic material inside our cells. This is why researchers have taken a serious interest in studying them. However, and this is important, most of these findings come from laboratory experiments using animal models or cell cultures, often exposed to concentrated amounts of these compounds. Translating that directly to everyday human eating patterns is far more complicated. Human studies, which rely on people accurately remembering and reporting what they've eaten over many years, have shown mixed results. Some studies suggest a possible association between high consumption of well-done, charred meats and certain cancers. Other studies find no clear connection at all. This is one of those areas of nutrition science that remains genuinely unsettled, and any doctor who tells you it's completely settled either way isn't being fully honest with you. Now let's talk about PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These compounds form a bit differently. When fat from meat drips onto an open flame or very hot coals, it creates smoke. That smoke rises and can settle back onto the food, depositing PAHs onto the surface. This is one of the reasons why flare-ups during grilling are worth avoiding. Not because a little smoke will harm you, but because repeated heavy charring from flare-ups increases the amount of these compounds that end up on your food. PAHs have also been studied extensively, and like HCAs, most of the strongest evidence for harm comes from laboratory research or from occupational exposure studies, such as research on people who work around heavy industrial smoke or soot for years at a time. Occasional PAH exposure from a summer barbecue is simply a different scale of exposure than what's been studied in those higher-risk occupational settings. Many of my patients ask me, does this mean blackened meat is dangerous? Here's where I want to be very precise because precision matters in medicine. Blackened meat, meaning meat that has visibly charred, blackened, crusty portions, is not the same as meat that has been properly grilled with a nice brown sear. A well-seared steak with grill marks is very different from a piece of chicken that's been left on the grill until the outside turns to black carbon. The blackened, burnt portions are where HCAs and PAHs concentrate. So if you enjoy grilling, and many of my patients do, especially in the warmer months, the goal isn't to give up grilling altogether. It's to avoid letting food char to the point of turning black and crispy in a burnt rather than a browned way. Let me tell you about Harold. Harold is 71 years old, and he came to see me last spring worried after watching an alarming video online. Harold loves his backyard grill. He's been grilling burgers and ribs every weekend for as long as he can remember. After watching that video, he was ready to throw out his grill entirely and never cook outdoors again. I told Harold what I'm telling you now. Grilling in moderation, using smart techniques, is not something you need to fear. What matters is avoiding heavy, repeated charring, trimming excess fat so it doesn't drip and cause flare-ups, and not building your entire diet around blackened, well-done meats several times a week. Harold still grills every weekend. He just does it a little differently now, and he feels much more at peace about it. You might be surprised to learn that something as simple as toast has come up in this conversation too. Does slightly dark toast really matter? This question comes up more than you'd think. Toast, potatoes, and other starchy foods, when browned at high heat, can form a different compound called acrylamide, which forms through a chemical process related to, but distinct from, the reactions that create HCAs. Acrylamide has been studied by health agencies around the world, including research bodies that specifically evaluate cancer risk. The honest answer is that acrylamide from dietary sources, at the levels typically consumed by the average person eating normal toast, has not been shown to clearly increase cancer risk in humans, even though very high doses in animal studies have raised concern. Regulatory and health agencies generally recommend toasting bread to a light golden color rather than a deep dark brown or black as a simple, low-effort precaution. That's really all this means for your morning toast. Golden, not blackened. It doesn't mean toast is dangerous. It simply means there's a sensible middle ground. Let's address burnt barbecue myths directly, because I know many of my viewers have strong feelings about their backyard cookouts. The internet loves dramatic headlines, and grilling season always seems to bring out claims like grilled meat causes cancer, full stop, no nuance. That kind of statement isn't accurate. And frankly, it isn't fair to the research either. The reality is nuanced. Occasional grilling, even with some browning and charring, has not been shown to be a significant, isolated cause of pancreatic cancer in people who otherwise eat a reasonably balanced diet. What the research does suggest is that habitually consuming large amounts of heavily charred, well-done meat, especially as a dominant part of someone's diet over many years, combined with other risk factors, may modestly contribute to overall cancer risk. This is very different from saying one burnt hot dog at a 4th of July cookout will harm you. Now, let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and that's reusing cooking oil repeatedly. Many home cooks, understandably trying to save money, will use the same oil for frying multiple times, sometimes over many days or weeks. Here's where things become really interesting from a science standpoint. When oil is heated repeatedly to high temperatures, it undergoes chemical breakdown. This process can increase the formation of harmful compounds, including some PAHs, as well as substances called aldehydes, which are linked to oxidative stress in the body. Oxidative stress, in simple terms, refers to an imbalance that can damage cells over time. Restaurant fryers that reuse the same oil for extended commercial frying, especially without proper filtering and temperature control, have drawn particular interest from researchers studying this issue. At home, if you do reuse frying oil, letting it cool, straining out food particles, storing it properly away from light and heat, and limiting how many times you reuse it, are reasonable, practical steps. Deep frying at extremely high temperatures deserves its own mention too. The combination of very high heat and oil that may be partially broken down from repeated use is where some of the more concerning compound formation tends to concentrate. This doesn't mean you need to eliminate fried food from your life entirely. It means that deep-fried foods, particularly from settings where oil quality and temperature aren't well controlled, are reasonable to enjoy in moderation rather than as a daily habit. Let's talk about processed meats compared to freshly cooked foods, because this is an area where the evidence is actually more consistent. Major health organizations, including the World Health Organization's Cancer Research Arm, have classified processed meats, meaning meats preserved through smoking, curing, salting, or the addition of chemical preservatives such as certain nitrates, as having a convincing link to increased colorectal cancer risk. And some research has also examined potential associations with pancreatic cancer specifically. This is actually a stronger and more established area of evidence than the overheated food question we started with today. Freshly cooked, unprocessed meats prepared at reasonable temperatures simply don't carry this same level of concern. So, if you're looking for one dietary change with more solid evidence behind it, reducing reliance on processed meats like bacon, sausage, deli meats, and hot dogs in favor of fresh cuts of meat, fish, and poultry may be more impactful than worrying excessively about an occasionally well-done piece of grilled chicken. Now, I want to bring you back to the bigger picture because I think it's easy to get lost in the details of cooking chemistry and lose sight of what actually matters most. Why does smoking remain a much larger pancreatic cancer risk than anything we've discussed so far? Smoking is, without question, one of the most well-established, significant risk factors for pancreatic cancer that we know of. Studies consistently show that people who smoke have a meaningfully higher risk of developing this disease compared to those who don't, and the risk tends to decrease over time after quitting. If you are a smoker and you're watching this video wondering what changes might protect your pancreas, quitting smoking will do far more for your risk than any change you could make to how you cook your chicken. The role of obesity and diabetes also deserves serious attention here. Carrying excess weight, particularly around the abdomen, and having type 2 diabetes are both recognized as established risk factors for pancreatic cancer. The relationship between diabetes and pancreatic cancer is actually a bit complex because in some cases, new onset diabetes in an older adult can occasionally be an early sign of an underlying pancreatic issue, which is one of many reasons routine medical checkups matter so much. Managing your weight through sensible, sustainable habits and working with your doctor to manage blood sugar if you have diabetes or prediabetes are genuinely protective steps. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret is 68, and she came to see me not because of grilling worries, but because she'd recently been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and was frightened after reading about the connection between diabetes and pancreatic health online. We talked through her risk factors together, her diet, her activity level, her family history. Margaret didn't need to live in fear. What she needed was a realistic plan, working with a nutritionist, walking daily, and following up regularly with her doctor to monitor her blood sugar. A year later, Margaret's numbers have improved significantly, and she tells me she feels more in control of her health than she has in years. Let's talk about Mediterranean eating patterns because this is genuinely one of the more encouraging parts of today's conversation. Research on Mediterranean-style eating, which emphasizes vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, olive oil, fish, and limited red and processed meat, has been associated with lower rates of several chronic diseases, including some cancers, in observational studies. This isn't about following a rigid diet plan. It's about a general pattern, more plants, more fiber, healthier fats, and less reliance on heavily processed or charred foods as a daily habit. So what are safer cooking methods? Practically speaking, baking, steaming, poaching, slow roasting, and braising tend to use lower, gentler heat and produce far fewer of the compounds we discussed earlier. Marinating meat before grilling has also been studied, and some research suggests that marinades, particularly those containing acidic ingredients like vinegar or citrus, along with herbs, may help reduce HCA formation during high-heat cooking. Turning meat frequently on the grill, rather than letting one side sit directly over intense heat for a long time, and trimming visible fat to reduce flare-ups, are simple, practical adjustments. Pre-cooking meat briefly in the microwave before finishing it on the grill has also been shown in some studies to reduce the time meat spends exposed to the highest grill temperatures, which can lower compound formation. Let me walk you through some practical kitchen habits every senior can follow without turning your kitchen into a source of anxiety. First, aim for a golden brown color rather than a black charred one, whether that's toast, meat, or roasted vegetables. Second, trim excess fat from meat before grilling to reduce smoke and flare-ups. Third, if you fry at home, avoid reusing oil more than a couple of times, and never use oil that smells rancid or looks dark and cloudy. Fourth, balance your grilling habit with other cooking methods throughout the week, baking fish one night, a slow-cooked stew another. Fifth, lean toward fresh cuts of meat and fish over processed, cured, or smoked meats as your everyday staple. Sixth, if you do enjoy well-done meat, consider cutting away any heavily blackened portions before eating rather than the entire piece. None of these changes require dramatic sacrifice. They're small, sustainable adjustments. Let me tell you about Robert. Robert is 74, a retired mechanic who told me proudly that he's grilled almost every single night for the past 20 years, rain or shine. When we sat down and talked through his habits, Robert wasn't interested in giving up grilling, and honestly, I wasn't going to ask him to. Instead, we found a middle ground. Robert now marinates his meats beforehand, keeps a closer eye on flare-ups, and has added more grilled vegetables and fish into his weekly rotation alongside his steaks. He tells me his food tastes just as good, and he feels better knowing he's made a few thoughtful changes. Now let's talk about when to see a doctor, because pancreatic cancer, while relatively less common than some other cancers, can be more difficult to detect early, which is exactly why awareness of symptoms matters so much. Please talk with your doctor if you experience unexplained weight loss, persistent abdominal or back pain, yellowing of the skin or eyes, new onset diabetes without a clear explanation, ongoing digestive changes, or unusual fatigue that doesn't resolve. I want to be clear that these symptoms have many possible causes, most of them far less serious than cancer. But please don't sit at home wondering. A conversation with your doctor, and sometimes some simple testing, can bring you real peace of mind either way. Let's also touch briefly on the broader lifestyle picture, because pancreatic health, like most aspects of health as we age, is influenced by the whole pattern of how we live, not any single habit in isolation. Maintaining a healthy weight through realistic, sustainable changes rather than extreme diets. Regular walking, even 20 to 30 minutes a day, has been associated with meaningful health benefits for older adults. Gentle strength exercise, using resistance bands or light weights, helps preserve muscle mass and metabolic health as we age. Eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, and prioritizing fiber from whole grains, legumes, and vegetables supports digestive health. Prioritizing quality sleep, which many of my older patients tell me becomes harder with age, but remains genuinely important for overall inflammation and metabolic regulation. Managing blood sugar carefully if you have diabetes or prediabetes, working closely with your doctor. Avoiding tobacco entirely, and if you currently smoke, know that quitting at any age brings measurable benefit. Limiting alcohol consumption, since heavy, long-term alcohol use is linked to pancreatitis, which itself is a risk factor for pancreatic cancer. And finally, keeping up with routine medical care, even when you're feeling well, because early detection and prevention conversations happen during those regular checkups, not just when something feels wrong. Let me tell you about Dorothy. Dorothy is 69, and when I first met her, she told me she'd essentially stopped going to the doctor for years because she felt fine and didn't see the point. After we talked, Dorothy agreed to resume annual checkups. During one of those visits, routine blood work picked up on an issue with her blood sugar long before it became a bigger problem. Dorothy didn't need dramatic intervention. She needed the kind of early, ordinary catch that only happens when you show up for your appointments. She tells me now that those checkups feel less like a chore and more like an investment in the years ahead. And let me tell you about Frank. Frank is 76, and he came to see me specifically because of anxiety after reading online forums about food and cancer risk. Frank had, understandably, become almost afraid to cook anything at high heat. He'd stopped grilling, stopped toasting bread, and had become fixated on every slightly browned edge on his plate. What Frank needed wasn't more restriction. He needed reassurance, grounded in real evidence, that enjoying a nicely seared steak occasionally or golden toast in the morning was not going to define his health outcome. We talked through the difference between occasional, moderate exposure and the kind of chronic, heavy exposure that research actually raises concern about. Frank still enjoys his Sunday grilling now, without the fear that used to follow him into the kitchen. So let's bring this all together. Current research has looked closely at compounds formed during very high temperature cooking, including HCAs, PAHs, and advanced glycation end products, sometimes called AGEs, which form when protein or fat combines with sugar under high heat, similar in some ways to the Maillard reaction we discussed earlier. Some laboratory and observational studies suggest these compounds may contribute to inflammation or cellular DNA changes under certain conditions. Human evidence remains genuinely mixed, and no single overheated food has been proven to directly cause pancreatic cancer in people. Pancreatic cancer has many well-established risk factors, and they carry far more weight than an occasionally charred piece of toast or a well-seared steak. Those established risk factors include smoking, obesity, chronic pancreatitis, diabetes, certain inherited genetic conditions, heavy alcohol use, and simply advancing age. I know that's a lot of information, so let me leave you with the simplest possible summary. You do not need to fear your grill, your toaster, or your favorite Sunday cookout. What matters far more is the overall pattern of how you eat and live day after day, year after year. Favor golden over blackened, favor fresh over processed, favor balance over extremes. And most importantly, focus your energy on the risk factors we know matter most: not smoking, maintaining a healthy weight, managing blood sugar, limiting alcohol, and keeping up with your regular medical care. If today's discussion was helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you would give this video a like and subscribe for more evidence-based health guidance for older adults. This video is intended for educational purposes only and should not replace personalized medical advice from your own healthcare professional. Take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Dr. Alan Mercer, wishing you strength, health, and many happy years ahead.